Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all distinguished members of AUHF, all participants watching from all over the world. It's my pleasure to introduce this very important session. The focus of the session is working together, productive public-private partnership relationship in affordable housing. My name is Festus Adebayo. I'm the CEO of Abuja International Housing from Nigeria. I've introduced the focus of this discussion. Before I bring out my panelists today, it is necessary for me to look into the topic, working together, productive public-private partnership, relationship in affordable housing. There's this inability of government to fund infrastructure. There's this increase in availability of affordable housing. And as a major emerging trends, PPPs are now considered as the way forward. There's currently a global housing affordability gap of over $600 billion, with countries like Nigeria facing a growing housing deficit of 17 million to 20 million housing units. PPP has therefore had its successes and failures, and we will be discussing what is the best way for government and private sector to collaborate toward having a productive public-private partnership in the delivery of affordable housing in Africa. With me as my panelist today, I have retired Brigadier General Dr. PM Tunde Reis. He's one of the proponents of cooperative housing using a PPP structure and a household name in housing finance in Africa. Also a former board member of Africa's leading housing firm, Shet Afrique. General Reis served as the Secretary Chairman of the Federal Housing Authority, where he received official commendation for his initiative from the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. While in his service, he conceptualized and delivered the Nigeria Army Housing Scheme, a retirement housing scheme for officers, which became a pace setter for Nigeria's nascent affordable housing industry. He is a fellow of the Nigerian Institute of Architects. He obtained a PhD in housing studies from the Architectural Association. General Reis received the highest medal from Blemmy's long service, the Grand Service GSSS of the Nigeria Chief of Army Staff Commendation. It is my pleasure to welcome you, Brigadier, retired Brigadier General Tunde Reis.
Thank you very much, Festus. I'm delighted to be here.
Also with me here today is the immediate past president of Real Estate Developer Association of Nigeria, Reverend Savio Ugochukwu Shime, a fellow of Nigeria Institution of Surveyors, a fellow of the Nigeria Institute of Building, a former president of Enugu Chambers of Commerce and Industry in Nigeria. Shime has delivered, to his credit, over 5,000 houses, affordable housing, in the last 6 years. Reverend Savio Ugochukwu Shime, it's my pleasure having you this morning.
Thank you so much, Festus. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Now at this point, I would like to start with General Tunde Reis. Working together, productive public-private partnership relationship in affordable housing. What is your whole view on this subject matter?
Well, thank you very much, Festus. First of all, I should say that public-private partnership is a much-needed platform to deliver infrastructure, not only in developing countries, but also in very well-established and developed countries. But I think the need to involve the private sector is even more pressing in the African context because government lacks the resources to provide much needed infrastructure for its people, especially housing. And where that is so, it needs to leverage its own resources. It should view government's resources as a seed rather than the main capital for implementing infrastructure projects. So government should endeavor to encourage PPP because the private sector can then, on its own merit, access much needed funding globally, wherever it's available. There are lenders that prefer to lend to the private sector. There are some lenders who prefer to lend to the public sector. So working together, they can pool resources to deliver infrastructure to our people. So it's the third way. It's neither private, it's neither public entirely. So it's public and private collaborating, each one doing what it delivers best.
Reverend Ugochukwu Shime, what is your own view? This subject discussion, working together, productive public-private partnership, relationship in affordable housing delivery in Africa. Do you think it's the way forward?
Thank you so much, Festus. I would like to start from where the general finished. I've been privileged to work in the public sector as a government official, privileged to sit as chairman of a board of Housing Development Corporation, and privileged over the past so many years to be on my own and run my own company, and been privileged in consultancy. I do think that the issue is this, is definition of objective by the two partners, and then determination of the strengths that each brings to the table. Over the years, I've seen a lot of collaboration in that regard between public institutions and private sector institutions. Like the general enumerated, there are a lot of challenges that government has in terms of furthering their goal of providing housing at an affordable price for the majority of the people. And part of the challenges they have is lack of funds, but on their own part also, they have some leveraging that they can bring on board, including approval processes, access to land, access to infrastructure, and some other public services that can reduce the price. So what has been done in most instances to define what each party wants to take away from the table. In many instances where I have seen public-private sector partnership, government is desirous of providing housing for the people. Government is desirous of providing employment for the people. Government is also desirous of ensuring that the project succeeds and does not suffer from the large political undertone that most of such projects are when they transit, and some of the other challenges that are there in terms of bureaucracy of government activities. So when these points are aggregated together, the aim is to take away from each partner the strong points and bring it on board and mesh it together to form a very stronger union of public-private partnership with a view of delivering at a lower cost to the end users, the houses that are produced. I'll give you an instance. A few years ago, I was the consultant to, in 2001, to Taraba State government. They were commuting from Yola to Jalingo every time. People were dying on the road, and the productivity of the state was at its lowest level. The governor then, Reverend Jolly Inyame, decided that government was willing to buy the land, give access to land, provide infrastructure with a view of not getting physical returns on the investment, but increasing the productivity of the civil servant, and at the same time, reducing the damage and loss of life on the road commuting from Yola to Jalingo. So that you see in this case, what government hopes to take away from the project is non-financial. So that is why it is needed. And that is the way going forward for many other institutions, to bring together the strong points that they have in order to eliminate the weak points that they have. And in the process, provide the needed housing for the people. And maybe in the process, provide employment for the people, and in the process also create multiplier effect in the local economy by way of socioeconomic fallout from such a project. So I see it as a way in Africa where you know that there are a lot of contending demands for the few resources that are available to government, so that private sector capital can flow in, and this time around, the price of those houses are moderated by issues of incentives that are brought in to bear by the government side, in terms of free access to land, in terms of enhanced infrastructure, in terms of reduced approval fees, in terms of reduced title processing and transaction fees. These are what government can bring on their own without costing them a lot, with a view to providing the needed to provide the people. So all over the country and all over Africa, we have seen successful models of PPP on affordable housing. But what we needed to look at going forward, as we are discussing, is to look also at some of the challenges that we have, why so many of them did not succeed. What are the challenges? And that is an area that I hope to look at, because we all agree that this is needed. The question then is, why did it not succeed? And that is the focus of our understanding, what can make it a success. And some of those things are the legal infrastructure that is needed to make it a success. What are the expectations from each party? What are the true intentions of the various parties? And how can we decipher it and contain it in such a way not to annul the intended purpose of the project? And I see now that as the years are emerging, there is none this recourse to PPP, because most governments have seen that what they have, which they could have as well provided as way of infrastructure, they can convert it. Let me say also that one of the things we have had in terms of PPP may not be from government, but also from, for instance, Federal Mortgage Bank. I see what they did, estate development loan, as a form of PPP. What they do is that whereas the interest regime for commercial loan for construction may be in the neighborhood of 24%, they give the developer a loan at 10% with a proviso that they reduce their profit margin, that they reduce so many other costs. That is a PPP of a sort, with a view to forgiving affordable housing. And that was brought in by Professor Mabu Munje in 2004. We give you a loan, a construction loan at a reduced price. But what you give us in return is that you will be a critical partner in determining the selling cost, so that it will be affordable to the people who have been contributing this fund. So public-private partnership may not necessarily be between a government agency, a government as state government or federal government. It could be between an MDA and the private sector. It could be also between any other government institution and the private sector. But the same aim is at play. Can we bring together our strengths to reduce the cost of what will be on offer to our people? And that is the crux of the matter. The rest of the other things are matter of detail.
Thank you, Reverend Ugochukwu Chime, immediate past president of Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria. I would like to go back to Brigadier General Dr. Tunde Reis. You are at the Federal Housing Authority, are the chairman of that organization. And we have a record that that organization, owned by the federal government of Nigeria, have been doing a lot of PPP, public-private partnership, to deliver some of their housing projects in various parts of Nigeria. I'd like to ask you, how effective is public-private partnership as a strategy for addressing the delivery of affordable housing from your experience?
Thank you very much, Festus. I think it's both ways. We have had very successful PPPs, and we have had some not so successful ones. Usually, the ingredients for success are evident right from the beginning in the way the project is structured, in the way the partnership is structured. Some partnerships are structured to fail from the beginning, unfortunately, largely due to maybe lack of capacity, lack of knowledge on what to do. So what I think is needed is for us to start to create models, templates, or framework that can be replicated so that our PPP projects are not one-offs. In the FHA at the time, we had a PPP unit, that did a lot of work on crafting out standard templates for partnership, which I think they took forward. So that made decision-making a lot easier. That made proposal evaluation a lot easier. And the other key thing is in the selection of the partner. If you do not vet the kind of partners that come into partnership with government properly, you might have purveyors who lack the capacity to deliver what they are opting for. So really there's no partnership. The other important aspect that we need to look at in creating effective PPP is the attitude of government itself. I think we still need a lot of education and training for both the private sector and the public sector in understanding the mode of operation of each sector. So for the average civil servant, the public sector, the private sector is all about profit. And the civil servant believes that their role is to curtail the profit greed of the private sector. And they forget sometimes that they are partners, so they get in each other's way. Also, the private sector might come with a perception that civil servants are full of bureaucracy and he wants to move as quickly as possible and they are getting in his way. So we need to find a way to educate both sides, to train them and let them understand that in a PPP, they are on the same team. They are playing for the same goals. That way they can better support each other, which right now I think is missing. I will share very briefly our experience in partnering with the Lagos State government under the Lagos Cooperative Homeownership Incentive Scheme. That's a very successful one. We have developed 4 estates in different locations in Lagos State. State government provided the land. We raised the capital and developed the housing units, in return for which we gave the state government some number of houses at a pre-agreed cost. The pricing was below market to the state government. The state government is then at liberty to allocate what came to it. So that partnership worked, but even then there were challenges. And we have learned lessons from that experience in that when you go into a partnership should be governed by a very clear agreement that both parties must undertake to honor. Where there is no rule of law, where the stronger partner, which is government, does not honor its own parts of the agreement, you are bound to run into trouble, because the private sector lenders who have given you facilities on the back of the partnership agreement then sees that parts of the agreement are not being fulfilled. They will not jump to giving facility to anyone who comes with a similar partnership in future. So the first thing is to ensure that government itself abides by its own agreement and ensure that they pick credible private sector partners who would also do what they have signed up to do. And it's for government to also understand that a PPP is not a contract. It's not, the private partner is not a contractor. is different, you know, but the perception is that for generations, civil servants are accustomed to just dealing with contractors. Once you are from the private sector, you have anything to do with government, you must be a contractor. So the understanding needs to be there that the PPP is different. We are both collaborating towards the same goal, and where government is bringing money, the private sector is also bringing its own counterpart funding as well. So they shouldn't see it as just the private sector coming to take from government. So government can do a lot to make them even more effective by spearheading standard framework for collaboration, so that once we have the standard frameworks, it's easy for everybody to pick and choose. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my general. I think I appreciate that your experience in Lagos State. And now I'll be going to Reverend Fukushima. Are there evidence of successful PPP strategies in affordable housing delivery? Let's look at our country, Nigeria.
We have had, like the general mentioned, some success stories in some cases. And I just mentioned one in Taraba State, which was a success and completed, and the beneficiaries were given a loan by Federal Mortgage Bank, and those loans are still running. And that was a very good success. So looking at that, so there are few and far in between. I will say that less than 25% from what the studies we've done, less than 25% of the PPPs succeed. They collapse. And the reason why they collapse, the general have mentioned some of them. I'd like to add also the fact that there is always a critical issue of timing in PPP. For instance, from next year, most of those governments will have less than 2 years to go. And most of those real estate projects will take 4 years, which will run into the next administration. So there's a time issue for anybody to consider. If you are going to go into a PPP with a government that will not be there, there's always this perception that the previous government have done something wrong. So you know that you are inheriting a baggage, you are inheriting a negative perception ab initio. So you are considered to be a criminal until you're proven innocent. And the process of proving that you are innocent may cause the project so many problems. And that is what it is. So in terms of looking at a successful PPP, I found out that issue of timing and sincerity of purpose go hand in hand. Issue of perception. And then also, number 4, the issue of definition of goals. In that of Taraba State, there was a clear definition of goal by the state governments. That what they are looking out for is to reduce the number of deaths on the road for people commuting from Yola to Jalingo to work, to make sure that the civil servants are there in Yola 24/7 to do their work. So they defined the expectations from the part of government. And they made sure, as much as possible, that there was this installation of the project from the civil servants. I like to say that no matter how we say it, I was a civil servant for 15 years. The mindset of the average civil servant differs markedly. So that one of the critical sharp disagreements is in terms of perception. It is very difficult for you to retrain a man who have had 30 years of a certain way of thinking. And in under 1 year, you want to change him to start thinking like a private sector person. You want a document that a financial institution that will provide the funding for the project once in less than 3 days. As a private sector person, you are willing to stay in your office and do it. The civil servant will not stay in the office and deliver it. So trying to merge two philosophies of operation and understanding that have been cast over the years in very solid forms is a major problem with PPP. And that is why most of the time you will be successful to find that either the chief executive has been in the private sector and understands the nuances and the challenges of the bureaucracy of the private sector and of the public sector and their negative perception of the private sector. And is not able to serve as a wedge between these two cultural mindsets of the public sector and the private sector. So for every successful PPP, there must be understanding of this critical non-written challenge that is there. You have to know that this is there. And it's very difficult for you to get through that. And then the general was being nice in trying to say that it's bureaucracy alone. There's also the element of corruption that and other expectations that are not written, because for a normal contract, they get certain things. And then for this, they expect certain things. One other problem that I have found over the years is that the government bureaucracy is made to function in terms of guidelines. I can get to offer my services as a surveyor at 50% discount to a private sector person. But once government comes in, they will play by the rules. And therefore, professional costs get to fly to the ceiling. And that is one of the major problems that we have had to contend with over the years on such projects. That as much as possible, if it is possible to allow the private sector to negotiate properly with all the professional and service providers and product providers on the project, that can happen. But because the average public servant is limited in terms of elbow room, they are supposed to go by the book, which they can defend. And therefore, they are constrained to give those services at very exorbitant price, which the private sector could have negotiated down. So there are a number of these issues that we need to sit down, advocate, and bring to bear a solution by way of getting each party to understand what are the weaknesses of the other party. Most of the time, we look at the weaknesses in terms of the process itself, but we have to look at the weaknesses also of the operators of any PPP, because that is where the time is the root. Their perception of each other will lead to boardroom crisis on those projects, and that has been the problem we have over the years.
Yes, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you can see that the very important personalities I have as my panelists are experienced players, experienced stakeholders who have been involved in both the public and private practice in Nigeria. You can see the experience they are sharing is so. There are some things we need to really look into as we move into the era of using PPP, Public-Private Partnership, to deliver affordable housing for our people in Africa. Now go to General Reyes. General Reyes, there's this organization established by the federal government in Nigeria by the name Infrastructure, Concession, and Regulatory Commission. What can they do, this establishment of the government? Is there any way they can assist in advancing the PPP for affordable housing delivery?
Thank you, Festus. Yes, certainly, I believe the Infrastructure, Concession, and Regulatory Commission has a role to play because housing is one of their mandates. The only limitation is that they exist primarily for federal government projects. And as you and I know, housing is very much a local matter. You know, even though we have the federal government as a major player in housing delivery in Nigeria. But they also admit that some state governments have approached the commission for support. You know, what in my view, without holding brief for the commission, what I believe might be useful will be for this commission to come up with standard templates, as I mentioned earlier. They can create those templates that states can use, and they can also have a kind of certification process, meaning that when you have put together as you are putting together your PPP, they can give some kind of enhancement to the transaction by saying, we have reviewed your process, we have reviewed the structure of the PPP, and will find it to be compliant, which will help you access funding better. You know, they can work with Garanco InfraCredit that gives guarantee credit enhancements, working together with this commission can find a way to make it easier to raise funding because you have the Commission's certificate of approval for your transaction. I don't see them visible enough in that regard. You see, I would like to see that Commission taking center stage in defining best practices for the entire nation, for saying, look, this is what we do at the federal level, this is what you can emulate and replicate at the state level. And also because it's a federal agency, it's likely to have tentacles or entities like itself outside of Nigeria. So that entity can be the bridge between those who are interested in the PPP delivery of affordable housing and similar entities anywhere in the world who might be interested. You know, it's easier as a government agency to invite participants into your industry, assuring them that you will be there as the umpire in the transaction. What investors want to see is the rule of law in every transaction. So once there's a regulatory commission, then it improves the likelihood, it enhances the chances of getting international funding. Because really, no nation has sufficient money to deliver all of the housing that it requires. The paper you shared with us, the statistics from McKinsey on UN's development goals, indicates that there is $51 billion deficit in affordability in Africa and the Middle East. $51 billion. So that is the difference between the cost of the housing, that's the market price, and what the prospective homeowners can afford to pay. So no government has that kind of money. So it's imperative that government needs to organize the delivery of affordable housing in a way that it will attract private investors. Once it attracts private investors locally, that we can access even our capital markets locally, then we're only one step away from accessing global capital markets on a competitive risk-return basis. That is the only way that we can attract sufficient investment into affordable housing delivery. And I think it's not only because it's included in the act setting of the commission in 2005. Housing is really at the heart of sovereignty. Being a sovereign state is about territory. Nigeria is a physical territory. The citizens of Nigeria deserve portions of that physical territory as they are for their own housing. Then we can start to address the socioeconomic empowerment of our people. Anything short of that, the people will feel shortchanged. They don't feel a sense of ownership. Yes, we know that the entity is there, but who does it belong to if I don't have a decent home of my own? Thank you.
Thank you, General Reyes. That's a very wonderful presentation. I wish I could continue taking all your points, but because my time is fast spent, so I'll be taking 2 closing remarks from you. I will start with Reverend Ugo Shime, the immediate past president of Real Estate Developer Association of Nigeria. How can PPP assist with development and use of land banks?
Well, I think that land banks are critical, and that is what government has a lot of it, or have access to getting it by virtue of the Land Use Act. They have the power to be able to appropriate land for public good. So they can use that to be able to get land and then be able to form a nucleus development in partnership with a private entity Many a time, we find out that in many states across this country and some other countries outside of Nigeria, you have government acquire a very large parcel of land with the intent of developing one project or the other. And because there's no nuclear development, there's no immediate entry to begin to do something, at the end of the day, that land bank becomes subject of litigation. And we have proposed to various state governments that you can partner with a private sector entity, give them a parcel of land at very nice smart watering incentive, so that they can now begin to have physical occupation of that parcel of land, maybe on the territory to be able to secure it. So we've been discussing with that. But on a general note, I think that I need to emphasize there are some critical success factors we must look at, no matter the area of leveraging that you want to do. Number one thing that I have advised many people want to enter into public-private partnership is to determine the sincerity of the government side, because insincerity is a deal breaker anytime. What is the true intention why government wants to enter into that agreement? Number two is to determine the issue of timing. Is it appropriate for you to enter into an agreement PPP with a lame duck administration that has less than 2 years to go? That is not wise at all. Also, is it okay for you to enter into a project that will take about 8 years or 5 years to crystallize? Why not break it into simple phases, such a way that even if it is 1,000 housing units you want to build, that will take you 5 years. Why not phase it and have the first phase? If it works very well and people are willing to continue, you cannot continue, so that you phase the project into manageable bites. And finally, also, I think that the issue of risk assessment is something that a lot of people don't go into because of the amount of money that is mentioned in the project conceptualization. This is a $10 billion, $1 billion project, $1 million project. We need to look at the risks. And some of those risks that we need to look at may come by way of understanding the character of the people, because that is a key deal breaker anytime. When you put on a project two sets of people who have different mindsets, they will never agree on something, because agreeing on any particular thing will need to look like somebody has given in or somebody has failed in terms of protecting the interests of the sector, in either the public sector or the private sector. So these are some of the issues that I think that we need to sit down, articulate them, and find a way of getting people to understand that it's a team and not contending parties. They may have come from different entities, but they have one singular goal: to make that project to succeed. They need to lay out what are the critical success factors of this project and what must give in and what timelines must be kept. And then also find a way embedded in the project dispute resolution process that does not take so much time away from the project timing. I believe that when we do this, whether it is the issue of use of land banks, which government have a lot of it, and with some other MDAs have a lot of it, we will have entered into an era whereby the discussions will center on not the parties, but on the project itself and how to get it to succeed.
Thank you, Reverend Goshuku Shime. Now, I just have 2 minutes. 2 minutes for Brigadier General Dr. Tunde Reis to respond to this, my closing remark, because I just have one for Shime more and then 2 for you. So you have 2 minutes more. Now, the question is this: how can PPP assist the required transition from construction, from housing construction to manufacturing of houses? We need to move from the level we are operating now, from this conventional method, to manufacturing of houses. So how can PPP be of assistance at this crucial time?
Thank you very much, Festus. I think for me, it's fairly straightforward. The main thing that is holding back the industrialization of housing production has been standardization and volume. So if you look at standardization, even within a state governments enter different PPPs with different parties, and they are building to different standards. So even within a state, there is no common standard. So it's difficult, when you talk about industrialization, you are looking at standards, producing a prototype that is repeated many, many times. So we need to sort out the issue of standardization, and it will be great. We will have even better numbers if that issue of standardization is taken up at the federal level with incentives to make people buy into the federal standard. You can imagine if you have access to credit, cheaper credit like Reverend Chime mentioned earlier, provided you are building to an agreed standard with a government institution. So that is the first step. Then the second step is volume. If we have PPPs, government already can give you a guarantee over a long period of time, even if to say, look, every year for the next 4 years of this administration, we commit to taking 200 units from you. So I can go and look for a manufacturing capacity that can deliver 400 units or 5 or even more, because I've signed up a number of PPPs with government, and government will make it first charge to buy those units of me, as opposed to building houses and waiting for end users to subscribe. Sometimes government already has a captive market. Government workers, for example, government key workers, workforce, so government can decide to buy for them, like that project that Reverend Chime mentioned in Taraba State. So it's easy to do volume once you have a PPP contract with government. So these are the ways I see that transition happening. Thank you.
Thank you, General Rees. Now, my last question today to Reverend Sovio Goshuku Shime is, how can PPP, Public-Private Partnership, assist in the adoption of sustainable housing method?
It's very, very important to note that with our current construction method, I know in some states that if you are to develop 5,000 housing units a year, there will not be enough sand using the current construction method. I'm just using a basic building material. So that calls forth for that incentivization program whereby government can come in and say, if we need to transit, because of volume that General mentioned, if we have to transit, we need to transit. If you are able to use XYZ material in your construction and follow XYZ methodology, which reduces waste of either the flora and fauna or which provides XYZ ecosystem advantage, we will give you XYZ amount of money, or we reduce XYZ amount of approval fees, or we shall give you access to credit line at a reduced rate. So it is possible to do that because, as General Rees will remember, in 2006 in Kano, we approved the National Building Code under Mimiko, Dr. Mimiko as the minister. You were there, I saw you in Kano in 2006. And that has not been domesticated in the States because domestication of a new construction methodology requires some form of incentive for people to move, for them to learn the new skills, asking them to take. So if we are to bring on board new sustainable housing construction methods, PPP is a very good vessel to bring it to bear because the initial cost of introducing and skepticism can be absorbed by some incentivization scheme to the developers or to the private entities that adopt this, that are going to be used as a guinea pig to test it. And even some of the people that will be resenting it, you have to sell those houses at a lower price regime to attract more people to patronize those things. So PPP is a very good model to introduce some of these sustainable construction methodology that we dearly need to move our country forward. And I believe that that is the way to go. And it is best suited to do that because of the strong linkages and support that government side can bring by way of their position.
Thank you, Reverend Shime. Then my final closing question for Dr. Reyes today will be, how can PPP help in the required transition from a largely financial product to a social infrastructure? How do we do that?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Festus. You recall earlier on I mentioned that, in my view, housing is clearly, affordable housing is a public good. It is an imperative for socioeconomic empowerment of our people. And if we see it as such, we need to start to explore even beyond PPPs. PPP is only the beginning. So you have, on one hand, public and private, they come together very briefly. And then sometimes you don't have the time for that government to fully implement a program. What about if we start looking at institutions that are quasi-governmental organizations, as exists in other countries? They are private sector led as well. It's a public-private partnership, but these are not one-off transactions, as in the case of housing associations in the United Kingdom. Housing associations are private sector led, but they are heavily supported, at least in their early years, by government. So if we can start to create these entities that are, they call them quangos, quasi-governmental organizations. They are PPPs in their own way, but because they lean heavily on government, they can also address that culture issue of public or private mindset that Reverend Chibem mentioned earlier on. Because now they are not only just working on a one-off partnership, they belong in the same organization. So there is an organization that's actually focused on delivering affordable housing, but that is not entirely government-owned, and it's private sector-led. Sometimes we find them as faith-based organizations. So churches, mosques, or whatever faith can lead their own housing association. They can be community-led. Isaleko can have his own housing association, which I would love very much. So we are there looking to house the people who can not afford housing at market rates in our respective locations. So this is a way that we can transition from just talking about bringing down interest rates to single digits, which appears to be the mantra of fixing affordability in housing finance now. Mortgage is only part of the story. It's not the full story. There are so many other ways to fund housing, and we should start to look at those ones, as I've just mentioned. Thank you very much.
Yes, we have come to the end of this very important session. As you all know, this our subject of discussion is so important for the housing sector to move forward, for the issue of housing delivery to be addressed. And I have no doubt in my mind that my panelists have dissected the subject matter, and they have shown us the areas where we need to improve on, and they have also shown us what may be the likely benefits of PPP if we all do everything to make it work, both at the level of the government and at the level of the private sector. Our focus today has been working together, productive PPP, public-private partnership, relationship in affordable housing. I want to thank Dr. Brigadier General Tunde Reyes. We want to thank you for this beautiful contribution you have made today. On behalf of the African Union of Housing Finance Conference, we want to say a very big thank you. We appreciate your presentation. And I also go down to appreciate the immediate past president of Real Estate Developers Association of Nigeria, Reverend Ugochukwu Shime. We want to thank you, even that despite the short notice, you deem it necessary to be part of this year's AUHF conference. I want to say a very big thank you. Now, finally, I want to thank the organizers of this very important conference for giving me, the moderator, and my panelists, the opportunity to be part of this year event. We say thank you to AUHF, thank you to the organizers, thank you to all the participants. Bye for now.
Thank you so much, Festus.
Thank you, Festus.
Thank you so much, General.
Thanks.
I appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.